Welcome to Faith Positive Radio with Dr. Joey Fawcett, the Christian business coaching conversation that increases your faith with greater joy at work so you love God and others more. Dr. Joey interviews Christian business professionals just like you to discover their secrets for working faith positive in a negative world. Welcome to Faith Positive Radio with Dr. Joey Fawcett.
Hey, Faith Positive Nation, Dr. Joey Fawcett here with another episode of Faith Positive Radio. That should be like my jingle or something if I could learn to sing, right? Delighted to have you on today. Our guest today is coming from the great state of Mississippi, where we have had family live. Nobody currently lives there, but anybody that wants to be adopted, we're more than happy to talk to you from the state of Mississippi. So I'm a little chagrined even to say that my guest today is from Mississippi, because over the weekend, Mississippi State defeated North Carolina State, my school of choice, from the many that I attended. So I probably should just stop the recording here and end all this nonsense, right? But anyway, Mississippi State's a fine school. I don't know about you, Faith Positive Nation, but man, it seems like so many places where I turn today, whether it's in the workplace or some of my coaching clients or whomever, there seem to be these sad stories that keep unfolding about substance abuse. And these stories are actually people's lives. And that's been true for me for years. It seems like I have been in contact with or known lots of people, regardless of what the substance was, whether it was alcohol or illegal drugs or prescription drugs. It just seems that there are so many people affected by that in our society today. Today's guest came to know the personal effects of substance abuse up close and personal when she became a foster parent. I could see firsthand the social climate in which substance abuse seems to grow best, as well as to discover what doesn't work in the ways that we as a society are responding, and specifically as Jesus followers are responding to substance abuse now. Maybe substance abuse is one of those taboo subjects. If you go to church, maybe it's just something we don't talk about, or we whisper about it rather than dealing with it. Or maybe you're a part of a community of faith that really has recovery groups and is opening and welcoming and even trying to help those families who are dealing with the effects of substance abuse. Either way, what we're doing now is not working so well, whether we're Jesus followers or society as a general. So how do we improve our response? And specifically, how do we as Jesus followers lead the way in helping persons do the hard work of rehabilitation and recovery from substance abuse? Today's guest is the founder of a nonprofit that you're going to want to check out. So as you're listening to this, if you want to go to enditforgood.com, that's enditforgood.com. If you're walking the dog or something and you don't have a hand free, that's okay. Just remember, it's easy to remember, enditforgood.com. Be sure to go there and check out the work that today's guest is doing, because there's a lot more information we can provide in a 30-minute conversation. We all know that Jesus is our greatest hope. How do you and I work with the recovery community to be Jesus in the flesh and to manifest the best of Jesus? Let's talk about that, shall we? Christina Dent is my guest today, enditforgood.com. Christina, welcome to Faith Positive Radio.
Thanks so much for having me, Dr. Joey. I'm really excited to be here and to get to interact with you guys at the Faith Positive Nation.
Oh, man, we're excited to have you here. So you became a foster parent, and that's really where your journey begins, with understanding the personal side of substance abuse. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, so I grew up in Mississippi, born and raised here. I was homeschooled K through 12.
Just tell me you didn't go to Mississippi State, did you? No.
I did not, but my husband and sons are huge fans, and we definitely watched that game. So there was lots of cheering in our home.
Oh, man.
I know.
Yeah.
No,
Between 20 and 20, we outplayed you, but unfortunately you outplayed us from
that's
20 to
right.
the goal line.
There
Yeah.
we go.
Oh, well, I'll be
Yeah.
quiet. Go ahead.
Yeah. No, I ended up, so I went to a Christian liberal arts university in Jackson. I got a degree in Bible from there.
Okay.
And really just had no interest in drugs, like never used drugs in high school or college. I grew up in a conservative Christian family. Still have those values today. So like you said, it just, it didn't impact me for most of my life. I just never thought about it. What's happening with drugs? I don't know. And then we became foster parents, my husband and I. And through that experience, I met a woman named Joanne. And she was a woman who had struggled with addiction for many years at the time that I met her. She had not been able to beat her addiction during her pregnancy. And her son was removed from her custody because of that when he was born. And so he went straight from the hospital after his birth and he came to my house and we became his foster parents. And I didn't know anything about addiction at that point. I could not fathom how a mother who loved her child could possibly be using drugs while she was pregnant. Yeah. And so in my mind, I thought, well, this isn't a mother who deserves to have this child. So I brought Beckham, her son, to his first visit with Joanne at the local child welfare center. And I pulled into the parking lot and popped his car seat out of the car. And I turned around and there is this woman sprinting across the parking lot towards me, weeping. Ooh. And she just runs over to me, doesn't say hello to me. She doesn't see me. She has eyes only for her little boy. And she comes running over and is kissing him, talking to him. Well, I'm kind of awkwardly standing there holding his car seat like, what is going on?
Talk about an awkward moment, right?
This is not what I thought I was walking into. And so she spent her 1 hour of visitation with him. She left for inpatient drug treatment. But she would call me and she would ask me to put her on speakerphone and she would sing to Beckham over the phone while she was in treatment. And I just felt this war in my heart starting over. Wait a second. This is not what I thought. And the more that I got to know Joanne, the more I realized Joanne does love her son this much. She loves him just as much as I love my 3 sons. Wow. Her addiction is not a lack of love. It's not a lack of even her faith. She was a believer at this time, although she would say certainly that faith reignited and got stronger in her recovery journey. But it was this really complex health crisis that she was going through at the same time that she was wanting to be present for this son that she loved so much. And that posed a problem because I knew that we were putting people like Joanne in prison every day. And once that came up close to me, I started to get this sick feeling of, oh no, what if we have misunderstood something about what really would help someone like her to have a thriving life, which I think should be our goal, should be reducing harm, helping more people have the opportunity for a thriving life. And that really set me on this journey to kind of learning what's causing the harms that we see. Because I think we've misdiagnosed the root causes of the harms that we have related to drugs. And the more that I learned, the more I became convinced that's absolutely what's happened. And so we're using the wrong tools to deal with the crisis at hand. And we get frustrated that it's not working. Why is drug use increasing? Why is addiction increasing? Why are overdose deaths at all-time highs? Why is crime from all these gangs and cartels? And it's because we have misunderstood what's causing those problems. And so we're using the wrong solutions to actually fix the root causes of the problems that we're dealing with. And that was kind of
when a hammer's the only tool you got, you see nails everywhere, right?
Yeah.
Well, it sounds like Joanna really challenged your paradigm, even dare I say, your conservative Christian values around who it is that deserves to keep a baby and who it is that the way things are working. Yeah. Well, when we get challenged, sometimes we retrench into our current mindset even deeper. Doesn't sound like what you did at all. In fact, it sounds like that experience with Joanna propelled you into a whole discovery.
Yeah, it really did. And I I resonate. It's not that I'm always that kind of like, oh, I've just got to understand something more that could possibly shake a foundational belief that I've had. Like what humans love to be in the stress of, oh no, I wonder if I've been wrong. None of us do.
No,
but really,
it's very uncomfortable.
It is uncomfortable. It's so uncomfortable. But what kept me going was, as a believer, as a Christ follower, I want to be trying to live with my eyes as wide open as possible. I want to see the world as it really is, not just how I want to believe that it is. And if there are things that I'm supporting that aren't helping people and that actually may be contributing to their harm, I need to want to know that. I think that is the Jesus way for us to open our eyes and say, even if it makes me uncomfortable, I'm willing to learn and I'm willing to consider if maybe, I've been wrong. And that for me, so, as I kind of went on this journey of trying to figure that out, is there something, that might be wrong? What I came to kind of realize is, when we talk about harm from drugs, if we think about kind of crime, overdoses, and incarceration, I kind of started looking at each of those and realizing, anytime you have a market that's criminalized, it's going to go underground if there's still demand for that substance. And that's going to fund gang and cartel activity. And so prohibition, kind of like in the 1920s with alcohol, where, all of a sudden Al Capone is killing people in the streets over alcohol. The same thing is happening today.
Successful, wasn't it?
Yeah. Right. So we have all of this crime that's being created by this underground market for drugs. So it creates crime and violence, and that generally falls the hardest on our most vulnerable communities. Then if you look at what happens with overdose, what we see now is 82% of people that died of an opioid overdose in 2020 had fentanyl in their systems, which we're not talking about prescription fentanyl. We're talking about people using drugs they got on the street. And when you buy something on the street, you don't know what's in it. You don't know how potent it is. It's, laced with contamination of different sorts. And when you have to smuggle something, you need it to be kind of the biggest punch in the smallest package. And so you need it to be potent. And one way to make it more potent is to add very potent substances like fentanyl to it. So, my little boy, my youngest is 7. And a couple of years ago, he cut his finger badly, had to go to the ER and get stitches in it. So this is in the very beginning of End It for Good's days. I had just kind of gone through this process of learning, and we get to the ER and the nurse comes in and she has a syringe and she says, I'm just going to give him some fentanyl to help with the pain before they do, the surgery. Well, also, simultaneously, in the newspapers are all these headlines about people dying of fentanyl overdoses. I think it's a perfect example of, it isn't fentanyl itself really that's killing people. It is the unregulated nature of it. If you have it in a controlled legal environment, you can dose it appropriately, where you can give a 4-year-old straight medical grade pure fentanyl, but you can give him the appropriate amount for his body to help with his pain. And on the flip side, on the street, you have 40-year-old, otherwise healthy men who are dying of a fentanyl overdose.
Right. Well, it's the wild, wild west.
It is the wild, wild west. Yeah. So we have this kind of, it increases crime, it increases overdose. And then just on the consumer side of incarceration, putting people in jail for possession of a substance. And for a lot of people, particularly if they're struggling with addiction, that can be over and over again. As long as they can't beat the addiction, they get picked back up again, they go back to jail, and then they come back out and they have a criminal record. They can't get employment. They've lost their housing. And this kind of cycle of harm, as I kind of began to think through, how do my values speak to this? So I'm a conservative Christian who wants strong families, safe communities. I value every single human life as made in the image of God. And as I began to kind of put that up against not what I had thought was happening, but what really was happening, as I began to learn, I started to realize, I think my values aren't changing. It is that the expression of those values related to drugs and addiction that is changing into what I think maybe is a more consistent approach that actually does help more people stay alive and help reduce crime. And, specifically talking about addiction, I love that you're talking about, how can we help people into recovery and to find meaningful, thriving lives? We know now that trauma is one of the main drivers of addiction.
Yes.
And so one of the heartbreaking things for me is that we are using the most traumatic system that's legally possible in the US, which is incarceration. It's designed to produce trauma in a person's life, to disconnect them, in the hopes that we can kind of shake them into doing a different kind of behavior. So we're using trauma to try to address a problem that is made worse by trauma. And then we're confused why this isn't working. Why aren't they stopping? And really what we're doing is throwing gasoline on an already burning fire. So when I think about ending those harms from the drug war, drug prohibition, I think of it not as creating some sort of perfect world, because there's always going to be people that are struggling with, addiction, but at least we will not be throwing the gasoline on that fire, and we can address that fire for what it is, instead of just making it worse and worse by incorporating more and more people into these traumas of death from overdose. And we got to think about, when that 40-year-old man dies of that overdose, the children he's leaving behind and the trauma that they are now enduring, growing up without a father. Yeah. So we're setting them up with higher risk factors for experimenting with drug use and developing addiction. We're creating so much of the problem that we're trying to address. And it is no wonder that it is not working. It's just the wrong set of tools for this problem, when we could treat it in kind of a public health way. That would better manage what's actually causing addiction and destigmatize it, so people are willing to come forward. Right now, if you're struggling with an addiction, to come forward and say, I need help, is basically coming forward to say I'm a criminal.
Yeah.
That's hard. That's hard to do. And how can we have the kinds of policies that preserve life, but also then on the other side, for those of us who are believers, how can our churches come alongside and create communities that welcome people in who are struggling, which is hard. I'm not saying it's not hard, but we know that there are millions of people struggling. And for each one of them, there is a whole family unit that's struggling along with them that needs support. Yes. And how can we do that? I think that's important questions, urgent questions for us as believers to really wrestle
tremendously
with.
So. Christina Dent is my guest today. If you'll go over to enditforgood.com, you'll find more of her fascinating story there, enditforgood.com, and you'll see Christina Dent there. So you've talked about really what I consider to be the manifestations of drug abuse, that is the harm that comes, the overdoses, and then also the relative ineffectiveness of incarceration. I mean, we could cite recidivism rates, right? And we'll see that basically it's just a revolving door in so many places, unless there are Jesus followers who step into those prisons and help bring about an enhancement of the rehabilitation that we all hope for, right? I mean, Chuck Colson, I've got friends who are in other types of prison ministries. All of them make a difference. And lower the recidivism rate. But that's low-hanging fruit to lower the recidivism rate. So because it's so high. Help us understand how we as Jesus followers in our local communities can step out of our, how do I say this without getting people throwing things at the podcast? Our perfectly constructed little world of people like us. Because what happened for you, I mean, you were homeschooled. You went to you majored in Bible. That's a pretty protected little world right there, right? The Father blessed you with a call, right, to foster a child, and that's when the bubble blew off of your little world, and you began to experience, hey, as you said a moment ago, here's the way things are, not just as I think they are. How can we as Jesus followers step up and into this tremendously large problem? I guess I'm looking for something that we can begin. small step or something that we can do in our local communities to say, hey, here's a place where I want to make a difference. It might be just one candle, but I'm going to stand here and light it as long as I can. What's something that we can do?
So I'd say it kind of depends on if people want to kind of push for policy changes that would change kind of this criminal justice approach. It's one of the things we do with End It for Good, not really directly lobbying, but just educating people on the kind of harm that's coming from these laws that use the criminal justice system to handle drugs and addiction. Okay. So that's one way. Another way is, and I think these are actually, you can do a lot of the same work and it impacts both, because most people really don't understand what's causing the harm. They think that drugs are causing the majority of the harm, and they haven't really thought about that the policies are causing a lot of the harm. And even with the drugs, what's driving drug use, drugs, addiction really isn't about bad people doing bad things. It's about hurting people trying to feel better.
Right. And brain science is involved. And I mean, there's Gerald May's book, Addiction and Grace, really opened up my world years ago. So
I think people I would never underestimate the power of, if you're on social media of any sort, proactively talking about the way that you think about addiction. If you think, you know what, we really need to just to help, just to humanize it, to see it not as this highly stigmatized thing. Here's what I have found is, in my life previously, nobody ever talked to me about the addiction in their family. Once I started posting on social media, this is before I even started End It for Good, just about rethinking how we approach addiction and what's causing addiction. What I found is, not on social media, but in real life, people would come up to me, people I'd known for a long time, and say, thank you so much for what you're doing. Wow. My son is struggling. Or one woman said, my mom struggled with an amphetamine addiction. Sure. And she said, at that time, nobody knew what it was. They just thought my mom has turned into this terrible person from the wonderful woman they knew. And so their family lived with this incredible stigma in the town. And so that only happened when I took the first step of proactively providing a safe place for people. What we know kind of about addiction is that families generally don't divulge that there is an addiction in their home for 7 years. So that's a lawfully long time for people to be walking alone. So the only way, because addiction is so highly stigmatized, the only way that people are going to feel comfortable sharing their journey with you is if you have proactively created a safe place for them to do that, and let them know, kind of fronting love and fronting compassion, even though you don't, it's one thing to say, well, if they tell me, I'll be compassionate. They're not going to tell you until they know you're going to be compassionate.
Or until they get caught, right? And then you'll discover it, but it's not like they're going to walk up and tell you. But there are signs, Christina, and I'm not saying my family and I are all that in a bag of chips, but raising two daughters, we knew what to look for in terms of addictions and things like that. And so little girls would come home with our little girls, and they'd want to stay the night, or they lived in the neighborhood or something like that. And just notice the way they were dressed or not dressed or cared for. There's a whole host of symptoms that you can look for. Not that you want to find an addict under every rock, but at the same time, just being sensitive and aware of the needs of others besides your own. It seems like it's so easy in the world in which, you grew up, in which I grew up, just to say, hey, that kid's not like our kid. Let's just push them away, rather than trying to say, yeah, you can spend the night for the weekend. And I mean, there's just you might not can fix the addicted parent, nor should you even try, or you may not even get an opportunity to minister to them for 7 years, right? But still, there's a child there who's hurting and who's looking for affection and just doesn't know any other way but what she or he knows. So there's just that opportunity. If you could just do that one thing, welcome someone in Christ's name into your home, and just be loving and accepting, rather than quick to judge. I mean, is that typically what you experienced before Joanna? The quick move to judgment?
Yes, definitely. So this has been really probably definitely the most humbling journey of my life.
Oh.
And I want to kind of separate that from kind of the policy change. I would never say,
Sure.
Christians have to agree on all of the policy changes. I've landed, on the ending of prohibition, but
maybe when Jesus comes back, we will. But
right. So I see a separation between policy changes. We can land on different places there, and what Jesus calls us to in terms of even people who are struggling with whatever. They're made in his image. They are loved by him. That doesn't mean we don't have to have good boundaries. If, there's an addiction, certainly there can be things you need to take precautions for, but the primary feeling that people in addiction are feeling is shame. And we unfortunately think that somehow if we heap more shame on them, if we let them know that we really think they're, screwing up, that somehow that's going to bring transformation in their life. And
like they don't already know they're screwing up. Right?
Yes. And it just doesn't. We have just so misunderstood kind of those roots of what's going on. I was just talking to a woman recently who spent 30 years in addiction, just really chaotic childhood. I was thinking about this when you were talking about, the children who might be in school with our own kids, she was in school.
They are.
And she said, she went to treatment 8 times before this last longer term sobriety that she has been in.
Common.
And very common. And the time that she went, she said, I woke up and I was just at the lowest of the low. She had considered suicide multiple times.
Sure.
And a friend of hers mom called. Now, this woman is already, in her 40s. So a friend of hers mom called and she just said, Allie, how are you doing? And she said she just felt loved and seen. And she said, I'm doing terribly. Like my life is a wreck. And the other woman said, if I can get you into treatment today, would you go? And she said, yes, I will go. And ended up going. And as she's telling me this, she's crying. Just
of course.
For her, just the feeling of being seen and known for what was really going on, and not, you need to get this together. Your life is a mess, but
get your act together and stop drinking and then come to church. Right.
Right. Just that I just never underestimate what that can do to let people know who are already dealing with so much shame and failure and self-hatred, that yes, they're loved and there's a path and there's a community for them. That was one of the other things she said was, every time that she had been to treatment before, she came right back out. And what are you going to do if you've turned away from a life of using after a long time in addiction? She said that all the people I knew were people who were using. I didn't have a community who was going to be my friends and support system when there was nobody else for me. And I think that's one of
the greatest challenges when you come out of recovery or out of prison is changing those relationships. Where's that new community? Because if you go right back where you were, you're going to keep doing what you were doing. So well,
and that's where the church can step in.
Yes, and just form some relationships, and then actually begins before they come out of recovery and before they come out of prison. Go form those relationships and just let these people know, hey, we're on your side. It's complicated. 8 times. I mean, I've known people in rehab. I've known people as many as 12. And we won't geek out on the brain science, but any addiction, whether it's illegal substances or whether it's pornography, any addiction is very difficult to break that habit. So Faith Positive Nation, as you can tell, this is a huge topic and we have only just scratched the surface. But here's what I want you to know. Christina Dent is on the forefront of finding compassionate and effective ways of helping bring about change, whether it's personal change or policy change. So I want you to go to enditforgood.com right now. At the very least, give a donation there to support her work. At the most, go in there and learn what it is Christina is doing. Reach out to her, email her, learn more about her story with Joanna. By the way, I just got to ask, please tell me a happy ending to Joanna's story, because I was about to cry when you were telling me about her singing to her baby over the phone.
Yes, she is doing great. Beckham turned 5 in November, and he is started kindergarten this year. Joanne works full time with the same treatment center that she got sober at. Wow. She now does all of their intake for new clients. and has been in long-term recovery for 5 years now. So yeah,
Great.
amazing ending. Doesn't always happen that way, but if she was, if she was sitting in prison, it certainly wouldn't have happened that way.
No, it couldn't have.
An opportunity for what can happen. That is just a wonderful thing. Beckham is growing up with a mom who loves him instead of in foster care while his mom is in prison.
Well, thank you for being a positive change agent there in Beckham's life as well as Joanne. So thanks for that. Christina Dent from enditforgood.com. What's your favorite Bible verse? Faith Positive Nation's always interested in that.
Yeah, so I love Isaiah 43. It's just been a passage I have loved for a long, long time through a lot of trials in my own life, where God says, do not fear, for I have redeemed you. I have summoned you by name, and you are mine. When you pass through the waters, I will be with you. When you pass through the rivers, they will not sweep over you. When you walk through the fire, you will not be burned, and the flames will not set you ablaze. For I am the Lord your God, the Holy One of Israel, your Savior. That's a great God.
Man, everybody's in some kind of deep water or walking through some kind of fire, aren't we? Yeah.
Amen.
Christina Dent, enditforgood.com is the website. Thank you so much. I pray God's blessings on you and your amazing work. I'll even pray God's blessings on your husband and his boys who pull from Mississippi State against my wolf pack. How about that?
Sounds good.
Sounds
good. I'll take it.
Thanks, Christina. God bless you and yours. Appreciate you.
Thank you, Dr. Joey. Appreciate you having this conversation.
Thanks for listening to Faith Positive Radio, the Christian business coaching conversation that increases your faith with greater joy at work so you love God and others more. Suggest guests and ask questions when you email Dr. Joey at info@getpositive.today. And be sure to get your free gift of the 5 positive business conversations to have today coaching program at getpositive.today. Until next time, may God bless you with everything your heart can hope for and more than your mind can imagine.